horror is kind of, it constantly edges up to the saturation point where nobody wants it anymore, and then basically immediately drops down and everybody wants it again. The saturation lasts like 17 minutes. It's basically always in demand. The films that are hardest to sell internationally are dramas and comedies. Full stop. The ones that are easiest are animated family movies, which is out of the budget reach of most filmmakers, I understand. Horror, thriller, and action. And action has a lot of issues with it as well, just because it's expensive to do safely and it's never worth risking somebody's health, safety, or life on set. Just it's not. Which basically leaves you with horror and thriller. And the nice thing about horror is, horror is kind of, it constantly edges up to the saturation point where nobody wants it anymore, and then basically immediately drops down and everybody wants it again. The saturation lasts like 17 minutes. It's basically always in demand. But there are a lot of subgenres in horror. Slashers can be really hard, but creature features are, at least right now, fantastic. If you add a sci-fi element to your horror or your thriller, it's going to make it a lot better right now. Subgenres, which would be more like settings like sci-fi, historical, all of that, tend to change a lot more quickly than genres do. Right. But the nice thing about thrillers is that you can tell basically the same story that you can with a drama. You just emphasize the suspense more than the emotion. And the reason that comedy and drama don't export well is that what thrills us, what scares us are pretty much universal to us as a species. But what makes us emotional, what makes us cry, what makes us laugh are highly culturally dependent. And that's why, without recognizable names, and I mean big ones, dramas and comedies just don't export well. Now, another thing I found out recently, just on the family front, and why I mentioned the animated level, is primarily due to the difficulty of dubbing it. Live action family movies tend to be highly regional as well, just because if it's in English language, it's easier to export. It doesn't export like animation does, though, because the dubbing is such a process and it's just so expensive to do well. And if you're making kids movies, subtitles mean nothing. It's because I don't always like reading subtitles, and I can read. I've written books. I can read. I still don't like it. An 8-year-old who can barely read, that's not gonna work.
Yeah. Tough sell. Yeah, and I guess, well, like what you were saying about comedy and drama, there's so much that's culturally kind of relevant to specific regions. People's way of delivering comedy is different from sometimes nation to nation, and dramatic situations. You get countries where there are arranged marriages and there are nuances in that experience that people in North America wouldn't relate to. So I can totally see why you'd say that those are tougher markets to sell the world on.
Oh yeah, I mean, actually, one of the best examples of this goes all the way back to my film school days. American Pie. There's the famous scene where I believe Jason is the actor's name, does unspeakable things to a pie.
Right.
And
I remember that.
Yes. And to an apple pie. And the Americans are all laughing at the outlandishness of that act. But internationally, what really worked was the scene directly after when his dad walks in and they're just having this incredibly awkward conversation about it. And that's a very good indicator of why, of how cultural and comedy changes country to country. Even if it's primarily still an English-speaking country, the nuances of comedy will not translate anywhere near as well as you think they will. So that's why it's tricky. And you can make money with a live action family film that's primarily comedic. You just have to know where to get that money and who's going to buy it.
What is a way that you can kind of balance a deal with the filmmaker that you're working with? I guess because one of the things that, and you alluded to it earlier, it's sort of the way you roll is to keep things balanced and so on. One of the challenges in any kind of relationship in the film business is finding a way to keep things equitable for both parties and fair for both. Are there any kind of red flags that you kind of throw up for filmmakers to watch out for when dealing with the sales agent? Things that you find are important to kind of keep the deal balanced, so that I guess one of the things I think of, and this is why I brought it up, was because when you're dealing with expenses for sales and distribution, this is one of the ways that some, there's this sort of legendary, burying the profits in expenses for distribution or what have you. So how is that kind of arranged and worked out so that it looks like a good deal for everybody?
So the way I did it, so the way I handled expenses while I was at Mutiny, because I actually wrote that contract, so I can speak to it pretty in detail, is we had a producer's corridor which matched our commission. So the way that would work is in 95 plus percents of cases, the filmmaker would be paid from the $1. The only times that it wouldn't happen is if there was incomplete delivery, so we needed to add an uncovered expense on top, and or if there was some legal issue or some additional insurance issue or anything like that. There's like a very, very limited category at which we would charge the uncovered expense fee, or sorry, the uncapped expense fee. Uncovered we just didn't touch. Uncapped expense fee. And that also came out before our commission came out. And then after that, which was always very limited, like if we were doing a theatrical, we'd also put DCPs in that category. But after that, we would do whatever our commission rate was, which ranged between 20 and 30%, depending on the film and a lot of other factors. We would pay an equivalent amount to both ourselves and the filmmaker, and then whatever our actual incurred expenses were under the caps would go to that. And that's how it would go. So the filmmaker's getting anywhere between 20 and 30% of the payment up front, and then once the capped recoupable expenses are covered, they got anywhere between 70 and 80% of the overall revenue, which I think is a pretty reasonable way of doing it when you're a small company and can't afford to do an MG. And there are a lot of small companies out there who can't afford to do an MG. And if they can afford to do an MG, you should probably just assume it's all you're ever going to see.
Right.
Sometimes something else will happen, but that is about where you're going to be. In terms of what you're looking for as a filmmaker, the length of the term is generally a pretty big red flag. The length of the amount of the expenses. If they're not doing a theatrical and they're just doing sales, if it's a sales agent, if they're charging more than $25,000, you should read that contract extra careful.
Right.
If the term is for more than 15 years, you should do the same. Personally, I don't like signing anything above 10.
Right.
And again, by the way, I'm not a lawyer on all of this. These are just deal points. So those would be the biggest things I look at first. The all rights and the expenses. All rights is actually often in the filmmaker's best interest. If you it doesn't make sense to try to sell it to have 3 sales agents selling it, because it just deprioritizes it for pretty much all of them, and it doesn't work out for you. But it is a big risk if you don't know who they are. So you really just have to call their previous clients, would be the biggest thing I'd say. No matter who you're talking to, call their previous clients. Don't ask them for references. There was one time when I was just starting out and I started calling references for a distributor. I'd kind of pitched like 30 people and nobody was buying. So this was basically all that was left. And I called, and I'm pretty sure it was the same dude, talking, who just used different Google Voice numbers, giving himself references. I'm pretty sure it's a so don't take references from somebody, just look at their IMDb and call other people. Yeah.
And when you say don't get too diversified, are you meaning, you know, having 3 sales agents for North America, 3 for, you know, worldwide, or are you meaning, because I've heard it said, and I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just sort of throwing it out there. Someone said, you know, you always want to divide your domestic from your worldwide, because a lot of the guys that work the globe have great contacts that way, and but they don't so much domestic, and vice versa. So they may have amazing domestic contacts. So make sure that you either have a sales agent for each category, or have someone that genuinely rarely has contacts that can handle everything. So
yeah. So maybe I'm just, this is possible that it's institutional thing on my end on this, because I've been on the other end of this for a while. But separating your domestic and country of origin from your overall sales, yeah, that's a good idea. In general, it's basically what I do as a rep. I just sell North America directly because I can call a lot of people, just say, hey, this might be for you. But the bigger issue is, like, if you try to do Europe for one person, Africa for another, and all of this, most of these sales agents do talk to people from territories all over the globe. And then what happens if this sales agent has a buyer that says, oh, I'm really interested in that one, and it's like, oh, I don't have those rights. What happens then? It's a competitive field. You don't always want to throw it over to somebody else because you just gave away 10 grand. And why would you do that? It's that's where it becomes a bit of an issue. But yeah, I mean, I understand the impetus, and I just think that that's not the right way to hedge your bets. I think the best way to hedge your bets is to do your diligence, which is look into these people, make sure they actually deliver for you. That's what I say.
And not have too many cooks in the kitchen, as they say.
Yeah, basically.